Howdy folks, Dominic here. Before we begin, a quick note. There is an extended version of this episode available on my Patreon. It is about 20 minutes longer, and it includes a deep dive into the Southern Kingdom and the people and leaders who left records about their lives. If you would like a bit of extra detail about these folks, it is available on Patreon. Link in the episode description. Now then, on with the show. The year was 1100 BCE, the late New Kingdom. A group of Egyptians walked the hills of western Waset, or Thebes. It was the third month of the flood season, Akhet, the 18th day, around late October or early November in the modern Western calendar. The men were well dressed in finery and pomp. They were attended by servants carrying parasols and extra sandals for the rocky, hilly roads. The party had guards, including the Magi police, protectors of the western city and the sacred necropolis. They had scribes, secretaries, attending to the business with pens and papyrus. Finally, they had priests, knowledge-bearers of ancient rites, rituals of purification, and secret locations. The party was well equipped and well staffed, fulfilling a special purpose. This was a royal mission in service to a king named Ramesses IX to be exact. The group came to inspect the hills of western Thebes, Waset Imentet. They came to inspect tombs. The officials walked these paths in response to reports, troubling reports of vandalism and looting in the cemeteries of the West, and they recorded these rumors and their inspection on a papyrus document, a papyrus that survives to this day and is now in the British Museum. This document, 3,000 years old, records the ancient work. Quote, "The third month of Akhet, day 18, under the person of the king of southern and northern Egypt, Ramesses, beloved of Amun. On this day were sent the inspectors of the great and splendid necropolis, including the scribe of the Chatti, the vizier or prime minister, the scribe of the overseer of the treasury. They came to examine the graves of the ancient kings and the tombs and resting places of the blessed ones of days gone by." End quote. The party crossed the hills overlooking their city. They visited tombs and chapels belonging to distant ancestors. They inspected monuments, both famous and obscure, including one called the Eternal Horizon of King Jeser-Ka-Ra, the son of Ra, Amun-Hotep. That is, they inspected the tomb of Amun-Hotep I, a pharaoh whose grave has never been securely identified. Sadly, the officials did not give enough details of Amun-Hotep's tomb to help archaeologists definitively locate it. But the king's monument was intact. They also visited tombs of the late Middle Kingdom, including rulers like Sobek-Msaf. His grave had been robbed, with a tunnel breaking into it from a neighboring monument. They also visited the tomb of Sekenenre-Ta, a ruler of the 17th dynasty, who had helped lead the rebellion against the hated Hyksos rulers. His tomb was intact, along with his sons Ka-Moser and Ahmoser I, great rulers in their day. The party visited the graves of priestesses, queens, and high-ranking officials. Some were safe, others not so much. But the inspectors made their rounds in the hills of West Waset. Finally, they came to a tomb older than most, built around 2000 BCE, some 900 years before the inspection. The monument belonged to a ruler of the city and of the south. His name was the son of Ra, Intef the Great, whom we know as Intef II. This king's tomb, in a cemetery now called El Tarif, was part of the inspection. The report said, quote, "The pyramid tomb of the king of southern and northern Egypt, the son of Ra, Intef the Great, which is north of the house of Amun-Hotep, and whose pyramid has been removed, but Its stela is still fixed in front of it, and the figure of the king, Intef, stands upon this stela. Examined on this day, the tomb was found intact." End quote. The burial of Intef II was safe. The monument was largely secure. It had lost a couple features of its architectural design, but overall it was intact. 9 centuries after his death, Intef II slumbered in peace. The inspectors referenced a couple of details that are worth noting. For one thing, they described a stela, a stone slab decorated with images and hieroglyphs that stood at the front of the tomb. That stela exists today. In 1858, excavations at Intef's tomb recovered a stone slab decorated with hieroglyphs. It bore the names of Intef II, the son of Ra, Intef the Great, and it had a figure of the ruler just as the inspectors described. It even had some artistic details that the ancient officials had noted. We'll come back to those a bit later. But the royal inspection around 1100 BCE clearly visited the tomb of Intef II, a famous king of their city. By the time they visited, that tomb was already 9 centuries old. Remarkably, the record of their inspection, which seems to be largely accurate, still survives to this day. It is a wonderful artifact that bridges the gap between one ancient generation, another slightly more recent generation, and ourselves. It also highlights the immense antiquity of Egypt. By the time Intef II died, the Egyptian kingdom was already 1,000 years old. And 1,000 years after him, the servants of pharaohs were still preserving the tombs of their ancestors. Finally, those servants themselves inspected these tombs a full 1,000 years before the birth of Cleopatra. It is a remarkable testament to the immense heritage of the Nile Valley civilization. And the tomb of Intef II, which survives to this day, was a prominent part of that story. The year was 2000 BCE, approximately. Egypt was divided, as 2 royal households competed for authority over the Nile Valley and the Delta. These houses and their kings both claimed dignity and legitimacy as rulers of the 2 lands. And those opposite claims had recently exploded in violent civil war. In the northern corner, a series of kings known as Khety stamped their authority over the lower Nile Valley, the Great Lake of the Fayum, and the vast expanse of the Delta. The northern kingdom was strong and aggressive. Their warlords took pride in spreading fear and fire in their enemies' districts. We'll meet more of those northerners later in this episode. In the southern corner, a series of rulers known as Intef held sway over the valley and the deserts. From their southern frontier at Abu, Elephantine, north to Abju, or Abydos, the house of Intef were dominant and secure. And their current scion, Intef II, also known as Intef the Great, had been dramatically successful in expansion. When he first took power, Intef ruled 3 of Egypt's districts or provinces. By the end of his reign, he ruled 10. From Abu at the southern limit to a place called the Valley of Praise in the 10th district, the Thebans had come to dominate a huge swathe of territory. It was a remarkable achievement, taking them from minor regional power to major kingdom. It wasn't an easy expansion, but across decades, the Southerners had achieved one success after another. We'll explore some of the factors and try to explain why they were so successful in our next and final chapter. In the meantime, there was one more issue to deal with. Since taking Abju, or Abydos, in the 8th southern district, the Thebans had struggled to capture another nearby town. The city of Tjeni, or Thinis, remained loyal to the northern rulers. and scattered references from local warlords and the Thebans themselves suggest that, initially, attacks on Tjeni failed to achieve a conquest. The conflict around this city may have been quite brutal, with some of the inscriptions describing fire and terror spread by various troops. That state-sponsored terror would continue before too long. But first, the Thebans had to deal with the stubborn, resistant town. Eventually, the city did fall. We do not know when exactly this happened, but 2 records from servants of Intef II mention a campaign against the city. First, a royal agent named Khety followed the king when the campaign was launched. Khety said, quote, "His person, the king Intef, honored me in the campaign northward to Tjeni." Okay, that's not the most detailed description, but it at least gives a record for the campaign's occurrence, which is better than we've had in a while. A second official, named Tjeni, gives a sense of the aftermath. Describing his service to the king, Tjeni said, quote, "I spent a period, long of years, under the person of my lord, the king of southern and northern Egypt, Intef, when this land was under his care, south to Abu, or Elephantine, and north to Tjeni, or Thinis, in the district of Ta-Wer." End quote. Tjeni wrote his biography after Intef II had died. More on that in a moment. And again, we don't get much in the way of detailed military descriptions. But at the very least, Tjeni and Khety give us a mostly reliable sense. The city of Thinis fell to Theban power. Intef achieved his conquest. Intef II had his prize, a victory over Tjeni. Coupled with his declaration from the Valley of Praise, we can now say that he probably ruled the first 10 districts of southern Egypt, from Ta-Seti, the first region at Abu or Elephantine, all the way to Wajit, the 10th district. When he eventually reached the end of his life, Intef could look back on a successful period of rule. And it was a long period of rule. Intef II had a remarkably long-lasting reign. He ruled Waset and the south for 49 full years. We know that thanks to 2 sources. The Turin Papyrus, or Turin Canon, written around 1300 BCE, records the names of many Egyptian kings and the duration of their rule. This document gives Intef II a reign of 49 full years. That is, he completed 49 years on the throne and then died in his 50th. That's a solid record by itself. Remarkably though, we can corroborate that from another monument. A stone stela erected at the tomb of Intef II preserves another date for the king's rule. That stela says regnal year 50. So we have a fairly secure record. Intef II ruled for 49 full years. Then, in his 50th, he died. That makes Intef one of the longer-lived monarchs in Egyptian history. Not the longest, but a solid innings, especially for a period where rulers are poorly documented, dates are fragmentary at best, absent at worst, and where the historical narratives are tangled when we can put them together at all. By the standards of his day, Intef II, king of southern Egypt, was a successful and enduring ruler, one who enjoyed a long-lasting memory. Long reign or not, Intef wouldn't live forever, and the king made elaborate plans for his afterlife. He commissioned a tomb on the west bank of the Nile, a tomb that survives today. Intef's grave is located at a cemetery near the modern village of El Tarif. It is just east of the valley of Dir el-Bahri and slightly past the turnoff when you are driving to the Valley of the Kings. The necropolis of El Tarif is largely forgotten by tourists and even by historians, but it has many tombs from the First Intermediate period. Among them are the monuments of the kings. The rulers of Waset, including Intef II, his predecessor, Intef I, his successor, whom we'll meet shortly, and many aristocrats of this particular region, all have tombs in the El Tarif necropolis. They all share a similar design, a similar architectural layout. It's an interesting one that I haven't mentioned before on the podcast. The tombs of the Theban kings follow a design that we call a saf tomb, after the Arabic word for column or pillar. The tombs start with a large open courtyard that, in the case of Intef II, can reach up to 300 meters long. These courtyards were dug down into the bedrock, creating a sort of sunken court effect. At the eastern end, facing the Nile River, the courtyard had walls and a gate, with a small chapel at the main entrance for offerings and worship. At the western end of the court, you will find a row of pillars, the saf from which we name the design. The columns are square, and Intef has a lot of them. The tomb of Intef II has 50 columns in 2 rows of 25 each, and they stretch across the western end of the court. With that courtyard in front, about 300 meters long, and the facade of pillars adorning the end, the tomb of Intef II is clearly designed for display first and foremost. You can imagine priests and courtiers gathering here for the funeral or even celebrations during life. With the sun shining down and the Nile flood covering the nearby fields, the tomb could look out over Intef's domain as a kind of eternal house. In fact, the design itself, with the courtyard, the pillared portico, and then the rooms behind, might actually be inspired by a sort of palatial house. It's hard to say because we don't have well-preserved houses from this particular period, but based on later Egyptian architecture from the Middle and New Kingdoms, the houses of kings and the rich would have large courtyards, sometimes with pools or gardens, and pillared porticos lining one end, so the tomb of Intef II might take inspiration from his actual earthly palace. The tomb part of Intef's monument is hidden behind those columns or pillars. The edges of the great court to the west, south, and north are dotted with small doorways, each leading to a side chamber or chapel. One of these doors, in the western section, hides the burial chamber, the place where Intef's coffin would lie and preserve his embalmed body. Alas, those burial goods are gone. Sometime between the royal inspection, around 1100 BCE, and the modern excavation of the tomb in the 1970s, robbers got to Intef's grave. Today, almost nothing remains, except for the architecture itself and a few details. Intef's tomb and the others nearby are all but forgotten outside of Egyptology. Tourist buses pass by the necropolis, and even over it, because the modern road was actually built on top of the cemetery. And the open court design of the Saf tomb makes these monuments terribly susceptible to sand filling up the enclosure. Today, the tombs of Intef II and his contemporaries are barely visible above the dust that has filled the enclosures, which is a terrible shame, and it means that we can't visit them today. Finally, there is one feature of Intef's tomb that is quite remarkable. The Saf tomb, with its courtyard, pillars, and rock-cut chambers, is not specifically royal in design. The hills of western Thebes are dotted with tombs belonging to wealthy Egyptians of the same general period, and those tombs have the same design as Intef's. They are smaller, of course. Intef was far richer than any of his contemporaries, but architecturally there is very little difference between the king's monument and those of the wider society. That is quite a change from the Old Kingdom, when rulers went to their graves beneath mighty pyramids, while everyone else made do with a mastaba, or a pit. This shift in design principle, and the similarity between the royal and the non-royal tombs at Thebes, might tell us something about the philosophies of these rulers. For a scholar named Dieter Arnold, who excavated the tombs of Intef and his contemporaries, The monument is, quote, fundamentally no different from that of the royal ones. These similarities, or rather that lack of difference and separation, might tell us something about Intef's attitude towards his followers. Rather than setting himself apart with a distinctive and unique monument, Intef II and other kings of Waset might have presented themselves more like first among equals. That is an argument put forward by the scholar Daniel Poltz, who has studied the monuments of King Intef II in great detail. It's an interesting idea that as these southern kings consolidated their realm and basically reinvented their office on the bones of the Old Kingdom, they might have presented themselves with some political humility. It wouldn't last, but it's an interesting feature of the early kingship, and it's visible just beneath the sands of El Tarif. Beyond the first among equals idea, Intef's tomb does give us a strong hint at his genuine personality. This comes from the monument itself, specifically from a stela. Earlier, I recounted the inspection of Intef's tomb around 1100 BCE. The royal officials doing that checkup were meticulous, and when they described Intef's grave, they included a specific detail about the appearance of a stela. They said, quote, "The stela of Intef is still fixed in front of the tomb, and the figure of the king stands upon this stela, along with his dog, called Behek, which is separate from his two legs." End quote. One of the best things about Intef II is that we know his preference in pets. Intef loved dogs, and he had one on his funerary stela. Actually, he had 5. When the slab of stone was recovered by archaeologists and pieced together again, scholars found 5 dogs adorning the surface. There are 3 standing in front of the king, 1 between his legs, and 1 just behind him. The dogs have different breeds, including the Chessem hound, with its long legs, pointed snout, and a short tail that curves up over the back. There is also a heavier breed, with shorter legs and a rounded snout, perhaps a mastiff or something similar. The dogs are named with hieroglyph labels. One is called Bahakai, or Behek. This dog is just in front of Intef's leg, and he is the one referenced by the royal inspectors. Another is called Abakaru, or possibly Merbaker, depending how you read a particular hieroglyph. A third dog is called Behetes, another Teker, and the last dog is called Tekenru. Interestingly, some of these names are foreign, words borrowed from other languages. We know that because the ancients labeled these particular dogs with alternate versions of their names. They even include a pair of hieroglyphs, Ar-Jed, meaning spoken as. Basically, the foreign dogs are described as so-and-so, also known as so-and-so. For example, one dog, Bahakai or Behek, is also known as Mahut. This means antelope or gazelle. A fitting name, because Bahakai seems to be a breed of dog that, today, we call a Saluki. They are hunting dogs, and they are fast. Saluki dogs can reach speeds over 60 kilometers an hour, or 42 miles, and they can maintain that speed for a long time. You can see videos online of Salukis chasing down antelope or gazelle and bringing them to the ground, apparently with ease. So a dog of this breed with a name like Mahut, or antelope, seems to be incredibly apt. You can easily imagine the scenario in which Intef gave the dog his name. Watching the animal chase down a gazelle or antelope, the king rejoiced at its speed and decided, "We shall call you Mahut," after the prey. Another dog called Behetes is also known as Kemu, meaning black. So presumably this dog had black fur, and Intef named him accordingly. The other dogs have names like Teker, with the epithet Wehat Nefet, meaning something like potbelly, and a dog called Tekenru, which might come from the Egyptian verb teken, meaning to be near. almost a companion dog for the king. These dogs with the foreign names might have come by trade or tribute from foreign tribes. We can guess that because one of Intef's servants specifically referenced tribute brought by foreign rulers. A man named Tjeni, whom I introduced earlier in the Conquest of Thinis, describes the tribute received by Intef II, and these came from chieftains who lived in the hinterland and in the desert. In other words, Intef II received gifts from groups living out in distant lands. Maybe those gifts included hunting dogs. I think this explanation is reasonably likely, simply because the dogs have two names. Presumably they had been raised with one particular name, and they responded to that when spoken. But after receiving these dogs, Intef might have wanted them to have a more classically Egyptian name, giving them the also known as version. That's just speculation on my part, but it does suggest that Intef might have received dogs like Bahakai or Pechetes as gifts from foreign rulers. As for the specific origin of these foreign dogs, one argument by the 19th century scholar Gaston Maspero was that the foreign names bore a striking resemblance to contemporary languages used among the nomadic tribes of the West. Maspero referred to these tribes as the Berbers. They are known today as the Amazigh. I do not speak any Amazigh languages, so I'll leave Maspero's interpretation up to the linguists. But the argument is an interesting one, and it would make sense given the names that Intef gave to these particular dogs. The dog Bahakai, also called Mahout or antelope, would be perfectly logical within the savannas, oases, and the hunting regions of the Great Western Deserts. So it is certainly plausible that some of these dogs came from those regions. Each of Intef's dogs has a distinctive appearance. Even the ones that are similar breeds have unique collars and tethers around their necks, and presumably in antiquity the stela was brightly coloured, and each dog had paint to give its colours or patterns. Sadly, all of those details are lost, and we just have the outline of the dogs themselves and their evocative names. But it's a wonderful record, giving a hint at Intef's personality and his home life. You can imagine the king of the south sitting in his palace, perhaps lazing at the end of the day, while around him a brood of dogs lie comfortably. 13 out of 10. They are good dogs, Intef. So we know the most important part of Intef's personality, the animals with whom he surrounded himself. But we also have a few details about the humans in his life. Intef's mother was probably called Neferu, meaning beautiful or perfect, and his wife might have been called Neferu Kait, or one whose Ka spirit is perfect. I wonder if you could get away with pronouncing Kait as Kate. It feels wrong somehow, but surely modern languages do not have a monopoly on that particular syllable. Anyway, Neferu Kait may have been a sister or perhaps a niece to Intef II. Her surviving titles include the phrase Sat Nesut, or King's Daughter, which means that her father, or at least one of her ancestors, was also a king. In the context, the only ruler we know definitively was a king of the south before Intef II was his brother Intef I. So it's possible that Neferu Kait was the daughter of Intef I, and that she married her paternal uncle. Another argument is that Neferu Kait was the daughter of Intef I and Intef II's mutual father, a man named Montu Hotep. That is speculative, and we don't know if Montu Hotep I ever actually claimed the title of kingship, but it's possible he got that title posthumously, and Neferu Kait might be his daughter, making her a sister or half-sister of Intef II. All of that, unfortunately, is speculative. We don't even have definitive proof that Neferu Kait was the wife/queen of Intef. It is the most likely scenario given the surviving records and monuments, but at the time I'm writing, it's still just an educated guess. Whoever the wife was, exactly, Intef II did establish a family, and he had a son, a boy whom he named, wait for it, Intef. Continuing the grand tradition of imaginative Theban monikers, The eldest son of the southern monarch has the same public identity as his father and his late uncle. Without spoiling too much, that boy would go on to become the next king, the ruler Intef III. Notably, the long reign of Intef II probably means that his grandson was already born before the king died. That grandson had a different name, Montu Hotep, which means Montu, a war god of the southern regions, is satisfied or content. This child would also go on to inherit power in his own time, and we know him today as King Montu Hotep II. We'll get to know him in the next chapter. So a few details about the family of Intef II do survive, which is more than we've been able to say for the past 4 or 5 generations. Maybe that tells us something about the context of Intef and his time, the increase in monuments that preserve names and relationships. Might be an accident of preservation, but it could reflect a greater sense of prosperity in the southern royal household. As they consolidated their rule, seized new territory, and received tribute from distant lands, they had access to more wealth, and apparently that wealth enabled them to employ skilled artisans capable of producing lavish and long-lasting structures. That might explain why more monuments survive to describe these relationships. Intef ruled long, and by the standards of his day, ruled well. But finally, the king died. He had completed 49 years on the throne of Waset, and now, in his 50th, he reached his ultimate end. Surprisingly, the king's passing is recorded on a contemporary document. Going back to our friend Tjeni, the overseer of the treasury, we learn of Intef II's death. Tjeni outlived his master, and when the fateful day occurred, he recorded it for posterity. Quote, "I spent a period of long years under Intef II. I was his personal servant, his true chamberlain. He made me great, he promoted me, he placed me in the place of his heart's desire, in his palace of solitude. I became noble, I became great, because he loved me, until he departed in peace to his horizon." End quote. Intef's death is described in the classic way, a departure towards the west, specifically the western horizon, which is the place of sunset and the place of death. We also get a reference to Intef's palace of solitude, his Achef en Wau, which gives the king a kind of Superman vibe. But just as the Great One of Krypton fell before Doomsday, Intef II ultimately came to the end of his years. Ironically, the son of Ra and the son of Jor-El had a remarkably similar tenure.
The Man of Steel has proven to be as vulnerable as the mere mortals who've looked up to him for more than half a century. Superman died.
The death of Intef II marks another transition point. The second phase of the first intermediate period comes to its end. And what a phase it had been. From a period of disunity, the lords of Waset had brought stability, order to the entire southern land. They had a long way to go before they could justify the claim to be kings of the south and the north. But momentum was on their side, and a lot of that success took place under Intef II's guidance. Ultimately, the sun set on a long and successful reign. The reign of the greatest king that Waset had ever seen. At least, the greatest so far. Meanwhile, back at the Legion of Doom, the House of Khety, the rulers of the north had to deal with the fallout of Intef II's conquests. Compared to their southern rivals, these northern kings are not well attested. Most of them are just names, largely recorded on the Turin Canon or the Turin Papyrus. Most of the rulers are called Khety, sometimes with an epithet or a throne name to distinguish. For example, there is the ruler Khety Merykara, a name that harkens back to the great Neferkara, or Pepi II, of the 6th dynasty. There is also a king called Khety Merykara, or the Enduring One of Ra's Ka spirit. Then, the most famous ruler from this line is a king called Khety Merykara, or Beloved of the Ka of Ra. Merikare is slightly better known than his contemporaries. This is thanks to the survival of 2 records. The first is a biography belonging to one of Merikare's servants, whom we'll meet in a moment. The other is a text, a literary work written sometime between 2000 BCE and 1800 BCE, depending which scholar you read. That text is a sebait, or teaching, and it is supposedly written by Merikare's father for the benefit of the king. Today, scholars refer to this document as the Teaching for Merikare, and it preserves a picture of royal life in the Northern Kingdom. As a hefty disclaimer, I should note, the Teaching for Merikare may not be contemporary with the king whom it names. Instead, the text might be closer to historical fiction, a work set within the time of Merikare, but not actually produced then. That is a point of debate among linguists and literary scholars. For example, the Oxford professor Richard Parkinson dates the teaching to approximately 1800 BCE, a work of the Middle Kingdom, centuries after the fact. Alternatively, the literary scholar Miriam Lichtheim argued for an earlier date, that the teaching was, at least originally, a product of the First Intermediate period. I won't get into that debate here. At the very least, the Teaching for Merikare could be a valuable source of historical memory, revealing later perceptions of the House of Khety and its rulers. It also contains small details and references that might tell us something about the Northern Kingdom. With that in mind, I'm going to use pieces of the Teaching for Merikare to illustrate certain points. But we can't rely on this as a true historical document. It has some valuable details, but overall it is unreliable. Anyway, to set the scene, the Teaching for Merikare describes the boundaries of the House of Khety, that is, the limits of the Northern Kingdom. The author says, quote, "You, Merikare, are on good terms with the southern territory, which comes to you bearing gifts and tribute. Behold, the mooring post, or boundary marker, that I made in the east is secure, from the town of Hebenu as far as the ways of Horus." End quote. The author gives 2 place names. Firstly, Hebenu, a town that is south or upriver of the northern capital, near the modern Lake Fayum, so it's in Middle Egypt, quote-unquote. The second location is the Way of Horus, the Wat Kher. This is a famous road, or region, that begins in the eastern part of the Nile Delta. It marks one of the borders between the lush, settled Nile Valley and the forbidding hill country of the eastern deserts. These boundaries are significant. For one thing, the author does not claim that the ruler, Merikare, has authority over the entire Nile Valley. So the story, contemporary or later, is clearly taking place during the Civil War, at a time when the southern kings, like Intef II, have already seized a huge swathe of territory. The author does claim that Merikare is on good terms with these southerners, and that they bring him tribute. That might indicate some periods of peace or diplomatic rapprochement, when good relations might resume between the northern and southern houses. Alternatively, it could just be a literary device, the appropriate description for a king of Egypt, one to whom all foreigners bow and give tribute. At any rate, these little details about the boundaries of the Northern Kingdom are quite interesting. They give a clear limit to the House of Khety's territory, one that stretches from the eastern Nile Delta, near the Sinai Peninsula and the Mediterranean Sea, upriver to the Lake of Fayum. So while this text could be a later product, the detail about Hebenu and the southern limit of their rule might reflect the genuine borders of the House of Khety. The kingdom's boundaries might be a bit fuzzy, but their capital is not. The House of Khety ruled from a city called Hout-Nesut, or Estate of the King. The Greeks called it Herakleopolis, the city of Heracles. Today, you will generally find the city referred to by the Greek name. Scholars will write about the city at Herakleopolis and describe the kingdom as the Herakleopolitan state. That is changing slowly. Archaeologists prefer to use the modern Arabic name, which is Inesa el-Medina. So depending what source you are reading and how recent it is, the name of this northern capital can change back and forth. You know, just to make things easy. The city of Hout-Nesut, Herakleopolis, remains unidentified. Archaeologists know the general location, but unfortunately there is a modern city on top of it, so they can't excavate the settlement itself and see what the northern capital was like. That might change in future as demographic patterns shift, but for now the city's physical remains are a question mark. We can say a few things about the region. For one thing, Hout-Nesut is located close to the Fayum, that enormous lake that branches off from the Nile. So it is fertile, some of the most fertile land in the country. The House of Khety probably had a decent agricultural base, and that might be a reason why they moved to this area. Recently, we looked at the climate of the late Old Kingdom, and one noteworthy feature was the problem of drought. That process of aridification seems to have started in the north, and it is most visible at places like Saqqara and Giza. The Fayum Lake and the new capital at Hout-Nesut was far south of those areas. Additionally, the Fayum itself was probably a good bulwark or defense against the encroaching deserts. In those circumstances, that might be a reason why the House of Khety moved to this area. The city of Hout-Nesut remains buried, but archaeologists have found its cemetery. A Spanish team has been working here for decades, and they have uncovered tombs and graves belonging to the First Intermediate Period and the Middle Kingdom that followed. So far, the graves are all non-royal. We do not have the king's tombs, mostly. But what survives is quite interesting. The locals of Hout-Nesut, or Herakleopolis, favored a slightly new style of tomb. Instead of the mastabas or deep shafts that their predecessors had built, these people dug shallow pits into the earth. They lined those pits with stone to form chambers with roofs, and they might have put a structure on top, probably made of mud brick. The superstructures of these tombs have not survived, but if you imagine a kind of miniature house with the stone burial chamber at its heart, that might be the general idea. They arranged these tombs into villages with streets running between them. In other words, the cemetery at Hout-Nesut seems to be a proper city of the dead, a true necropolis in the classic sense. This type of tomb seems to be unique to the north. We do not see this design in the south. I'll come back to this cemetery in the next chapter, because the necropolis at Hout-Nesut has additional stories to tell, some of them rather dramatic. For now, just know that the city of Hout-Nesut, the capital of the northern rulers, remains buried, but the necropolis is slowly returning to the light. So that's what we know of the Northern Kingdom around 2000 BCE. It's not much to go on, but that is all we have. What about the ruler? When Intef II died in Waset, the northern king was probably named Merikare, or beloved of the Ka spirit of Ra. Merikare is the royal name. His personal name is technically unknown, but there's a strong chance he was also called Khety, like the other rulers of his house. I'll just call him Merikare. There are enough Khetys and Intefs already. But yeah, he probably had the same personal name as his predecessors. Not an imaginative time for naming conventions. One interesting thing about Merikare is that out of all the rulers of his lineage, he is the only one whom we know might have built a pyramid. In the necropolis at Saqqara, small monuments like tombs, false doors, and stelae record the activities of priests, religious officials who worked in the pyramid temples that belonged to ancient kings. In the First Intermediate period, several of these priests recorded themselves with the title Regulators of the Work Crews of the Pyramid of Merikare. That is the Meti Enza Waj Sut Merikara. These priests or overseers worked and left monuments in the Saqqara necropolis. The regulators have names like Hotepi, or one who makes content. Anpu Emhat, Anubis, is in the forefront. Gemni Emhat, or Gemni, is in the forefront, probably referring to the Old Kingdom politician and philosopher Ka Gemni. There is also one called Chai, or Youngling. These regulators apparently worked in the pyramid temple of Merikare. The pyramid itself has not been conclusively identified, but it might be a small monument located east of the pyramid of Teti. This monument is known to scholars as Pyramid Lepsius 29, the 29th pyramid identified by Carl Richard Lepsius, the great Prussian scholar in the 1800s. If that is accurate, then the Pyramid of Merikare today is a small headless mound. Only the foundations remain, about 52 meters long on each side, or 170 feet. There are traces of the ancient chambers, including some granite blocks that would originally have blocked the passages. There are also the remains of a stone sarcophagus, including a broken lid. The monument itself has never been fully and comprehensively excavated, mostly just surveyed by the Lepsius expedition and a few scholars since then. It's a sad end for Merikare's pyramid, but perhaps it is fitting. In a period in which the kings of northern Egypt are so poorly attested, the fact that one of them was able to build a pyramid at all is quite remarkable. Unfortunately, even that limited success could not offset the overall decline of the northern regime. Merikare built his monument, and there are records that confirm its existence. But physically, it is a poor relic. The lone and level sands stretch away, and nothing beside remains. The next part of our story has an uncertain date. It may have taken place around 2000 BCE, shortly after the city of Tjeni or Thinis fell to the southern kingdom. Or it may have taken place years or even decades later. We don't have a firm chronology for this period, so take this reconstruction with a grain of natron. The Thebans had achieved a victory. Tjeni had fallen, but the northerners would surely retaliate. And we hear about such a move in the tomb of a northern governor. His name, confusingly, is Khety, just like the House of Khety that held the northern kingship. I'll call him the Governor Khety to distinguish him from the kings. Governor Khety was the lord of Zauti, the modern city of Asyut. He was the successor, possibly the son, of the governor Et-Ibi, whom we met in the last chapter. Et-Ibi had served the northern rulers and defended their territory, including the city of Hut-Nesut, or Heracleopolis, from southern aggression. Now, in the time of Governor Khety, we hear about a counterattack. Like his predecessor, Khety has a tomb at Asyut, and that tomb includes images of his army. On the southern wall of the monument, facing towards the enemy, the artists decorated Khety's tomb with rank upon rank of soldiers, dozens of them marching in order, carrying large shields and long spears. Presumably, this is the army of Zauti, or Asyut, the warriors of the district following their lord. Presumably, they are the ones who participated in the military endeavors that Khety recorded in his biography. On the walls of his tomb, hieroglyphs record the life and deeds of this governor. Notably, this biography includes explicit references to the northern king Merikare. It also includes a journey by the king to visit the Asyut region. The biography says, quote, I, Khety, conveyed the king upriver. The sky cleared for him, the whole land was with him. The dignitaries of southern Egypt and the great ones of Hut-Nesut, or Heracleopolis, the district of the queen of the land, presumably a goddess, came to repel the rebel. The land trembled, all the people were in terror, the villagers were in panic, fear entered into their limbs. The land burned in its flame. End quote. Like his predecessor, It-Ibi, the governor Khety was a proud servant of the northern kingdom, a kingdom that claimed authority over the whole Nile Valley. Khety says that the royal entourage included the dignitaries of southern Egypt, the Khatia Shemau, which, in the circumstances, must be a political fiction. Given the rebellion, the independence of the southern kingdom, it's extremely unlikely that Merikare had any of those people in his court. Perhaps these dignitaries are more like rulers in name only, people whom Merikare had appointed to be overlord of such and such a district, but who stayed in the northern court and had no power in the territories they claimed. That is speculative on my part, but in the context, with a northern king claiming to be the legitimate ruler of the two lands, the idea of appointing fictitious dignitaries might fit with the idea of unity that is so important to the ancient Egyptian kingship. Also, like his predecessor, Khety's army employed terror tactics to exert their authority. When the northerners came south, their troops spread fear and fire. Such methods appear to be the weapons of choice for the governors of Asyut. It-Ibi had described how, quote, fire was put upon the enemy, and I drove out rebellion. If he created rebellion, I created fire in the southern districts. The references to fire, or chet, are numerous, and we should take them seriously. The northerners were not random, haphazard arsonists. These were organized troops in service to a monarch, and they were spreading chaos in contested regions. Like the battle for Ta-Wer in the previous episode, we appear to have instances of state-sponsored terror. Not the best legacy for the northern rulers. Khety and King Merikare went upriver. We are not sure the extent of their attack, but the governor does mention one place. He says, quote, the front of the fleet reached Shes-Hotep, while the rear of the fleet was still at location lost. This town, Shes-Hotep, is the modern city of Shutp. It is located at the southern end of the 11th district, that is, right on the border with the kingdom of Intef II. Because Khety's biography is damaged and fragmentary, it's not clear if this was the southern limit of their movement, or if this was their launching point, the place where they mustered their troops in readiness for the attack. The second interpretation might be more likely, because contemporary references and a later historical text suggest that the northern kingdom did launch a major counterattack, one that had terrible consequences. Earlier, I introduced a southern official named Tjeni, who worked for Intef II as a treasurer. The biography of Tjeni briefly describes the limits or borders of Intef's southern kingdom, and these limits were actually smaller than we might expect. Tjeni said, quote, I served Intef while this land was under his command, from Abu, or Elephantine, to Tjeni, or Thinis, in the Ta-Wer district. End quote. According to Tjeni, the limits of Intef's kingdom stretched from the 1st district at Elephantine down to the 8th district at Tjeni and Ta-Wer. This is significant because of when these limits existed. Tjeni outlived his master, Intef II, and continued working in the southern government during the next reign. With that in mind, his biography, carved on a stone stela, must have been written in the later period of his life. So it is extremely likely that the limits he describes, the boundaries of Intef's kingdom, are the limits that existed when that king finally passed away. In other words, by the time of Intef II's death, the northern kingdom stretched from the 1st to the 8th districts. That is significant because previously, Intef II had claimed authority over the first 10 districts, reaching all the way north to a place called the Valley of Praise, the Wadi Khesi. That rule may have lasted for several years or decades, but if we are reading Tjetji's biography from a chronological point of view, it seems like in the later years, the Thebans might have lost control over 2 northern districts. Of course, that is entirely speculative. Tjetji might simply be describing the limits of his authority within the kingdom of Intef. But the timing of Tjetji's biography and the way it has to fit into the overall chronology does suggest that in the last years of his reign, Intef lost control of 2 northern districts. That might be the result of a northern counterattack. Finally, there is evidence from the text called the Teaching for Merikare. I introduced this earlier. It is a document supposedly written in the First Intermediate period and addressed to the king himself. Whether it is contemporary or not is a point of debate, but the author of this text also references an attack southward, an attack in which things went terribly wrong. The Teaching for Merikare says, quote, I, the northern king, reached Tjeni, or Thinis, opposite its southern border. Like a cloudburst, I seized the city. My predecessors, who are true of voice, had not done anything like this. Troops clashed with troops, as had been foretold by the ancestors. The battle for the Black Land took place in the cemetery, in the cutting up of tomb chambers, in the destruction of deeds. I did that. End quote. This is one of the more ambiguous but significant texts related to the First Intermediate period. The author of the Teaching for Merikare, supposedly one of the northern kings, describes an atrocity. Apparently, troops of the northern armies violated the cemeteries, the Kheret Netcher. This violation apparently took place in the vicinity of Tjeni, or else in the wider district. That is incredibly significant because Tjeni and the nearby town of Abju, or Abydos, are some of the oldest royal communities in the country. The cutting up of tomb chambers and the destruction of ancient records supposedly happened in the course of this northern counterattack. The author of the teaching is not proud of the event, and he includes it as a warning not to repeat such failures. But putting the literary context to one side, the historical question is intriguing. Thanks to the governors of Asyut, like It-Ibi and the governor Khety, and a couple members of the southern court, like Tjetji, we can say with some confidence that these particular districts, the 8th, 9th, and 10th, were hotly contested during the civil war between the north and south. The district of Ta-Wer, in which Tjeni and Abju are the major centers, seems to be the focal point for fierce and increasingly violent conflict. Multiple high-ranking officials from both sides describe attacks and counterattacks in these particular regions, and the governors It-Ibi and Khety from Asyut seemed to be especially proud of spreading fire and fear in the areas they invaded. While we treat all of these sources with some caution, they are prone to exaggeration and boasting in the glorification of their deeds. There does seem to be a cohesive picture of an incredibly savage conflict. It is certainly plausible that, in the course of such a war, a troop of northern warriors may have become overzealous in their attack, or perhaps flush with a recent victory, and seeking plunder and wealth, they might have attacked a local cemetery. We can't say for sure which cemetery they attacked, but it must have been a significant one, because this event was recorded for posterity in the Teaching for Merikare. If that document was written centuries after the First Intermediate period, then the violation of this tomb must have been so horrible that the memory of it lasted for generations. Bearing in mind how fragmentary these sources are, It does seem like the northern rulers, or at least one of their armies, may have committed the ancient Egyptian version of a war crime. Naturally, this poses a question. Is there any archaeological evidence for such an attack? Well, maybe. The city of Tjeni, or Thinis, has never been located archaeologically. It might be in the region of a modern village called Gerga, but the site itself, and the cemetery that might have been nearby, remains unknown to archaeology. Hopefully that will change within my lifetime, but for now we don't know anything about that particular town, so we also don't know about the tombs or their physical state. Nearby, though, there is another prominent town and cemetery, the town of Abju, or Abydos. Abydos is one of the better excavated sites in the Nile Valley. Large-scale archaeological projects have occurred here for more than 150 years, with the largest taking place under William Flinders Petrie. In the course of that work, around 1900, Petrie's team excavated the tombs of Egypt's first rulers. Kings like Namer and Horus Aha and the queen Mernith are all located in the cemetery of Abju, or Abydos. The excavation team working for Petrie did find some evidence for fire and burning in some of the royal tombs. The damage was not widespread, and at least some of it might have been recent due to digging and looting by locals. But some of the damage seemed to be ancient. Petrie did not offer a date, but it is possible, extremely tentatively, minutely possible, that some of the damage in the tombs of Abydos occurred in the First Intermediate Period. We have no hard evidence in the form of artifacts or texts to connect that damage and these monuments with any particular event. But, in the circumstances, this might be tentative evidence for the northern counterattack. Under no circumstances could we ever say that is definitively what happened. The tombs might have been burnt due to accident or any number of events taking place in later centuries. But it is possible that some of this damage was the result of the Northern War. So there may be some evidence for the Northern atrocities. Nothing definitive, but maybe something. After the war, after the Terror, the king Merikare visited the city of Zauti, or Asyut. The governor Khety describes the king's patronage for his town and the benefactions he performed. Khety says, quote, "The ruler of the two lands, the king of southern and northern Egypt, Merikare, decreed that I, Khety, should make a monument for the souls of Anpu, or Anubis, the great god, to restore the temple of the city god of Asyut, to raise the ancient walls, the original places of offering, and the sacred ground, which the god Ptah had built, which Jehuti or Thoth had founded, for Wep-Wawet, the lord of Zauti." End quote. By Merikare's command, Khety would be a restorer. He would commission repairs and build new monuments for the greatest of local gods. The patron deity of Zauti, or Asyut, is Wep-Wawet, the opener of the ways. A wolf/jackal deity who is often associated and confused with Anubis. Wep-Wawet also appeared in the biography of Eat-Ebi as a god who gave excellent counsel or plans and advised the path forward, which means that Wep-Wawet is partly responsible for the terror tactics, the burning and savagery. That is not a criticism. One of Wep-Wawet's lesser-known aspects is the warrior. His icon appears on ancient artifacts like the Namer palette, and his name, the Opener of the Ways, can have multiple meanings. He opens the ways to the afterlife on behalf of the dead souls, and he opens the ways to the afterlife by killing people in battle. He opens the ways of the body, including the womb for birth, and he opens the earthly roads so that travelers, the king, or soldiers can traverse the landscape easily. Wep-Wawet, the Wolf of Asyut, is an ancient and respectable deity. But he has a dark side, one that the lords of this city represented in their campaigns and honored in their monuments. With their job done, the south burning and the people in terror, Khety and Merykara headed back north. The governor accompanied his king downriver to the city of Hut-Nesut, or Herakleopolis. Supposedly, they were received in pomp and ceremony. Quote, "The king's fleet went downriver and landed at Hut-Nesut. The city came forth, rejoicing over their lord. Women mingled with men, the old mingled with children." End quote. The arrival of the king and his governor sounds almost like a victory parade, with the people of Hut-Nesut coming forth to praise the king for his brilliant victories. Finally, Khety rounded out his biography with an invocation to his patron deity. He prayed, quote, "Behold, may my name live forever in the temple of Wep-Wawet. May my memory be beautiful in the columned court. May some communicate my name to others in years 100 after 100 on top of my life upon earth. May I be among those who endure." End quote. 4,000 years later, Khety's wish comes true, and centuries after his death, we remember his time on earth. It's a shame that Khety's legacy, and the legacy of Merikare, the northern king, include such acts of cruelty. While they restored the monuments of Wep-Wawet and honored the great gods of Asyut, they also spread terror and fire in the southern districts. They are, at least partly, legacies of flame. Thank you for listening to the History of Egypt podcast. Next time, we reach the final chapter of the First Intermediate Period. The Southern Kingdom is rising, but they haven't won, and the conflict will get worse before it gets better. Next time, we meet the son of Intef II, the king Intef III, and then his grandson, Montuhotep II, and we see how these kings dealt with the violence of the northern rulers, and how they attempted to reunify Egypt. That is next week, in our final chapter of this series. Before I go, I would like to thank the priests, my top-tier supporters on patreon.com. These fine folks help fund the construction of great and glorious monuments to all the deities. And thanks to their funding, my warriors are disciplined, and they do not spread fear or fire in the southern districts of my country. Such military generosity is kindly supported by Arthur, James, Veronica, Ashley, Nidin, Kyla, Andy and Chelsea, Mykost, Yola, TJ, Terry, Eric, and Linda. Folks, you are all too generous, and as always, I am in your debt. To everyone listening, thank you so much for joining me. I hope you are enjoying this mini-series and look forward to the return to the New Kingdom. For now, take care, look after your deities, and ensure that no harm comes to your local necropolis. I'll see you soon. The tomb of Intef II on the west bank of the Nile contained numerous decorated stelae. These slabs of stone covered with art and hieroglyphs recorded aspects of the king's reign and elements of his home life, including the dogs in whose company he rejoiced. Another stela, currently in the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York, also includes 2 prayers or hymns written by the king. The prayers are dedicated to the setting sun and to the goddess Hathor. They are evocative texts that give a hint of Intef's piety. The prayers go as follows, quote, "An offering that the king gives, and Osiris, an offering of 1,000 of bread and beer, 1,000 of ointment jars and clothing, 1,000 of every good thing, to one who is honored by Atum-Ra in his evening, who is honored by Hathor, who nurses the dawn. He, the king, says the following: Will you depart, O Father Ra, before you praise me? Will the sky conceal you before you commend me? Praise me to the night and to those dwelling within it, so as to find me among your worshippers, O Ra, those who adore you at your risings, who lament at your settings. May the night embrace me, may the midnight shelter me by your command. O Ra, I am your deputy. You made me the Lord of life, who lives forever. Commend me to the night's early hours. May they place their guard upon me. Praise me to the early dawn. May he put his guard about me. I am the nursing child of the early dawn. I am the nursing child of the early night. Born at night, whose life is made in darkness, whose fear besets the herds with back-turned horns. With your eyes' red glow, the sun, as my protection, you will find me praising your approach. And now the prayer to Hathor. Quote, O you lords of the western sky, O you gods of the western sky, O you who rule the river banks of the western sky, those who rejoice at the coming of Hathor, those who love to see her beauty, rise up. I, Intef, let Hathor know. I say at her side that I rejoice in seeing her. My hands come to me, come to me, come to me. My body says and my lips repeat, sacred music for Hathor, music 1,000,000 times. Because you love music, 1,000,000 times music to your car spirit wherever you are. I am he who makes the singer awaken with music for Hathor every day at any hour that she wishes. May your heart be at peace with music. May you proceed in goodly peace. May you rejoice in life and gladness with Horus who loves you, who feasts with you upon your foods, who eats with you of the offerings. May you admit me to it every day, the Horus Wa-Ankh, honored by Osiris, the son of Ra, Intef, born of Neferu. End quote. Praises for Ra, music for Hathor. When preparing his tomb, Intef II ensured an eternity of rejoicing. And surely, on quiet nights on the west bank of the Nile, you can still hear the sistra that rattle for Hathor. You can still hear the drums and the harps that beat a rhythm and pluck a melody for the great gods of the sky. The praises of Intef II live in the hieroglyphs upon this stela, and his piety echoes through the ages.